Miss. I was 13, and my teacher asked the class a question, and I knew the answer. And my teacher looked at me and she said, "Why is your hand up? You don't know the answer." So I slowly lowered my hand. And inside of me, there was this anger, but more frustration as my white classmate answered the question I knew the answer to. And it hurt, and I should have done something. I should have said, Miss, that's not fair. But I didn't. I said nothing because I was too frightened as a 13-year-old black child to question the establishment that existed behind the eyes of my white teacher and everything I knew about the status quo. I went home that night and I didn't say anything to mum or dad. I just kept quiet. And inside, as the pain grew, as the days wore on, I thought, how am I going to get her back? I know, I can put a spider in her bag. But then I realized I hated spiders, so that was a goner. But then, as the days wore on, as a child, you just get used to the way you feel about yourself because of the way other people perceive you. I just didn't feel that I was worth anything. I was demoralized. And then a week later, my mum and dad said, "Right, two Jamaican parents, alayo to my brothers and sisters, sit in front of the television and watch this." And when your parents tell you to do something and they're Jamaican, you don't say no. So I sat down with my brothers and sisters, and it was a Sunday night, and I was 13. And we watched Roots for the first time. For anyone who doesn't know what Roots is the story of a young African slave called Kunta Kinte. It showed how he was stolen, captured into slavery as a young boy, and how all his life was enslavement. And I sat there and I thought and I watched, and I was terrified. I couldn't understand how this could have happened. I knew about slavery, but I didn't know. And that night I went to bed, I had two emotions. The first was relief. I felt relief that I wasn't born 150 years before, that I wasn't a slave. And the second was guilt, because I felt bad for my ancestors and for the fact that I felt relieved that I wasn't going through what they went through. But the next day, I went to school. And I waited. And I waited. Miss. I waited for somebody to talk to me about Roots. And not one of my teachers mentioned it. And I couldn't understand why. And I thought, Miss, Roots was the biggest thing on TV. The whole black community were talking about the injustices of slavery, but not one of our teachers mentioned it. But as the weeks wore on, as the days wore on, our teachers did talk to me about something. When I walked into my history classes, they talked to me and took me back to a time that they celebrate within British history. They took me back to 1689, the time of the glorious revolution, when the monarchy and the sovereignty of Parliament was sealed over the monarchy. What it did was it showed you that this was a time, the glorious revolution, where civil rights were beginning to form, where individuals were beginning to have a voice, where there was free speech in Parliament. And they were singing our praises. Listen, this is fantastic, our teachers were saying. You've got to hear this, but this is me. Hold on a minute. Miss. At the same time, all this is happening, thousands and millions of people were being held in bondage. My ancestors, Miss. Nobody said a word. And the pain of it, I should have said something. But I didn't, because I was scared to question my education, the curriculum, my teachers. The status quo was entrenched in me. And I was just a 13-year-old schoolgirl. Who would listen to me? So I thought, what can I do? And then I realized there was something that in my spirit I needed to find something. Maybe I didn't have a voice. Maybe I was frightened to raise my hand and tell my teachers. But I didn't realize I had a gift. I had a gift that I had taken for granted, that I'd forgotten about. But this gift didn't come in the form of an ordinary gift you go into the shop and pick up. This gift came in a wrapping that was toxic, that was cruel and was vicious. The wrapping was made up of racism, social injustice, being told as a 13-year-old to go back to where you came from. That's what this wrapping was made out of. And when I thought about the wrapping, I thought about Dad. My dad, who's now no longer with us. My dad, who came to Britain in 1961 and wanted to make a life for himself and become and continue to be the businessman he was when he was in Jamaica, selling flowers and growing food to hotels and restaurants. My dad employed people. And when he came here and he came with Mum, he wanted to continue that dream. But no one would give my dad a loan. No one would give my dad a right, because he was greeted with no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, the colour bar. That's what my dad and my generation and my parents were greeted with. And my dad said to me, when he became a plasterer and a builder, because he could not get a businessman's job, my dad said to me, when he took me to look at my first house, he said, when you walk into a house, never worry about the furniture or the decoration. Look beyond what the potential of that house can be. And my dad, after everything I saw my dad go through and witnessed as a man who I called a lion, to be treated like he was nothing by young and old white people in a country that he had come to on invitation. When I think about that, I thought Dad thought beyond and showed me to think beyond. So yes, I looked beyond that packaging and I started to pull it apart. And I started to tear away all the toxicity. I started to look away from all of that. And inside I found my gift, my diamond. And that diamond was my education. An education that my parents gave up everything to give to me. And I said, what can I do? I started to use my ability. I started to read. I started to learn about my history. And in those books, I found a diamond. Diamonds. A diamond of men called the Sons of Africa. These were men who were ex-slaves, who were living in the age of slavery, who stuck their hand up high in the air and said, hell no. We are human beings, we are not chattel. They raised their hands to write articles, to visit, to go all over the country, to talk about the evils of racism. These men were the first black parliamentary lobbyists, and they made me begin to start finding a way to raise my hand. And when I thought about them, and when I saw them, and when I think about what they did, I read on and I found Mary Prince. OMG, what can I say about this woman? She was the first woman, and a black woman at that, to deliver a petition to Parliament against slavery. Mary Prince was rough. She was cool. And I was finding these people in these gems of history that were hidden within pages that existed, that not for us. But what I learned more than anything else was this. The sons of Africa, Mary Prince, Mary Seacole, all these people who I read about, they showed me something. They showed me the significance of what equality, diversity, and inclusion means. Because they go to the heart of the lived experience. You can bring in consultants and pay them a whole heap of money to talk about this. But the only people you need to ask is us. We live it. We're in it. We do it. And that's why they are as important today as they were then. So I say this to you now. I say this to my dad who's watching me right this minute saying, get on with it and not cry. I know what he's saying. You can be on a bus. You can be in a queue. You can be in a bank. You can read Braille. You can do sign language. You can do anything you want in this world. How are you going to raise your hand? I found a way to raise my hand. I raised my hand when I became the black secretary for the union and helped people who were marginalized to have a voice. I raised my hand when I became a lawyer at the age of 41. I raised my hand when I became the chair of the Race Equality Network in Waltham Forest. I raised my hand when I wrote articles about the inequalities in law and how important it is that we have a more diverse legal system and have a more open system for young and older people who want to become lawyers. But most and most of all, I raised my hand. I raised my hand when I have become a pro bono lawyer for Windrush victims whose lives have been devastated by a hostile environment and how so little people know about them. I raise my hand. I raise it high in the air because I am proud to raise it. And I say to you, raise your hands. And I tell you this, I will never lower my hand again. Thank you.